Jim Fleisig.
Hi, welcome to the show. I'm Jim Fleisig. Today's show, we will discuss progress being made in secure cloud computing in the federal government. With me today on the show are Frontis Wiggins, the Chief Information Officer, Department of State; Christine Calvosa, the Deputy Chief Information Officer for Resiliency and Technology at the FCC; John Edwards, the Chief Information Officer at CIA; Michael Hilliard, the Deputy Chief Technology Officer at EPA; David Chive, the Chief Information Officer at GSA; and Doug Bourgeois, the Director of Deloitte Consulting. Let's get into the show. Let's talk cloud computing. We're going to start with progress. Let's hear a little bit about the progress that you see from your vantage point within your agency with cloud computing programs. Let's start with John Edwards at CIA. John, how are things going there?
Things going well. A little over 3 years ago, we stood up what we refer to as C2S, our commercial cloud services. We partnered with Amazon Web Services and basically put a complete Amazon cloud region behind our guards, gates, and guns. And it's fundamentally changed the way we do business from an IT standpoint. What it gives us is literally unlimited storage and compute, automatic load balancing, and quite frankly, higher security. What it's done for us from a mission standpoint is allowed us to do things at the speed of mission and not the speed of government. For example, it used to take us 120 days to provision one server. We went to virtualization. We got that down to 60 days. With some business process improvement, we got that down to 20 days. And we thought we were doing really well. With this cloud in place, we've now got that down to under a minute.
Wow.
And what it's done for us, we've increased our usage over 208% year to year. And we've got about 90% of our business applications in the cloud. So for us, it's been a game changer, and as I said, fundamentally changed the way we do IT.
That truly is remarkable. You know, and I kid all the time in the show that we're living in a world where time for decision making is approaching zero. I mean, in terms of how fast decisions need to be made, especially when you're talking about some of the business that you're in the intelligence world and in terrorism and things like that. There isn't very much time. Decisions need to be made immediately. Frontis Wiggins, tell us a little bit about progress over at State Department.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. It's been an interesting transition to the cloud. When I first became CIO back in July of 2016, we had very few instances of cloud products. Now we're up to over 52 different products that we're using in the cloud, different platforms. And cloud has helped us not only in delivering services, but also in governance. Last May, we created something called the Cloud Computing Governance Board that allows us to take a customer requirements-based approach to IT requirements. Before, people used to come to us with solutions in search of requirements, and now instead we've got a requirements-based approach where we get to interview our customers and figure out what's the best way to leverage technology to meet their business needs. That's a fundamental change for us, and it's allowing us now to move more rapidly to the cloud, but in a governed fashion. It's also helped us to kind of hit the conundrum of what corporate applications are really cloud ready, and that's a big sticking point because a lot of people want to move to the cloud, but not every application is ready for the cloud out of the gate. So it's allowing us to take a more measured approach to cloud. We've been using it overseas in a number of specific locations, and hopefully we can get to some specific examples a little bit later where we're doing things like election monitoring in places like Benin that allow real-time checking on not only voting results, but also health and safety of folks that are out there in the field.
Yeah, excellent. You know, I like that governance model too because we've been talking about cloud for a number of years now on this show, and governance was always something that, because it requires change, requires a little different. So having that governance in place to help manage the process, I'm sure, makes a big difference. That's brilliant. Doug Bourgeois at Deloitte, tell us how Deloitte's positioning and what you're doing to support the customer base out there and some of the places where you see cool progress being made.
Sure, Jim. We're seeing progress across actually all the sectors of government, Intel, civilian, DoD. A couple examples I'd like to call out, though. One is in the Navy. Where not only for what they've done, but also kind of where it's taking them as a next step, right? Which is they've stood up a managed services organization, which is essentially a cloud brokerage, which has enabled them to standardize their infrastructure, improve security, much like what John talked about earlier, and in particular reduce their footprint of their legacy IT infrastructure, which lowered their total cost of ownership. But building on that, Now they're looking to how do they better manage the multiple cloud environments that they've been able to stand up for their different programs and their different mission areas to support. And I think this is an area that's going to be front and center for the next couple of years across government.
That's pretty cool. We do data center consolidation, then we move to the cloud, then we do cloud consolidation and start consolidating clouds, and then sort of like a nice, interesting progression going on there.
Precisely. There's a parallel there to what we did in the 80s and 90s with client servers, right? So we had this great technology and we put it all out there, and same thing happened with cloud, right? Very, very similar dynamic.
Yeah, very good point. The Christine Calvosa at the FCC. How are things going with cloud computing at the FCC? What kind of progress are you seeing there?
Great. We're full speed ahead with leveraging cloud computing solutions, both from infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and platform as a service. We've also invested a lot of time and effort in solutions, in secure solutions in the cloud as well. So we started about 3 years ago when Dr. David Bray came on board at the FCC, where he presented a three-tiered approach for us to move to the cloud. First phase was stabilization, right? Stabilizing our infrastructure. We did that by moving our data center, our in-house on-premise data center to a commercial data center. And then we also leveraged Microsoft Office 365 and moved all our email to Office 365. The second phase was rationalization. Just like many other agencies here, we have a portfolio of applications and they just need to be rationalized. There's a lot of people who have silo applications that kind of do the same thing, so rationalizing that. And then really hitting the tier of modernization and going full force into cloud computing. So we have started with small applications, portable type applications, and now we're really just seizing the opportunity for our licensing portfolio, our public safety applications, and our auctions portfolio. So we're full steam ahead.
Wow, sounds like it right across the board. David Chive, how about over at GSA? Tell us about some of the progress you're seeing there.
Great. First, thanks for letting me be a part of the discussion. This is just such a great story, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So at GSA, we started moving to the cloud in 2012 in Mass, and we've converted the vast majority of our commodity IT out to the cloud. Email and collaboration, back office workflow, CRM, and then spent a fair amount of time moving secondary things like mobile device management and stuff like that out to the cloud. And that provided a springboard for us to then take cloud offerings out to our customers. We're the General Services Administration, and we serve the rest of government.
Not only are you have responsibility for GSA, but you have government-wide programs.
Right. So, the internal IT shop that I run has been a test bed to see what could possibly work out in government. What's the art of the possible? And so we've spent a fair amount of time building acquisition vehicles for cloud purchasing and listen to the community to try to create better avenues to get out to the cloud. One of the things that we did recently, because we wanted to make sure we were hearing the customer population, federal government customer population well, we built the Federal Cloud Center of Excellence. Dr. Bray is a part of that. A great number of CIOs are a part of that. And they're doing a couple of things there. They're understanding that maturity within the cloud community and the federal government is increasing, but they're building repeatable process and repeatable paths forward to double down onto the move to the cloud. They're building roadmaps for IT capabilities for cloud. They're building fast-track contracts so that government agencies can get out to the cloud. Likewise, our technology transformation service has said not every agency is ready right now to go to the cloud, so they've built some pathways for agencies to get out there. They built cloud.gov, which is a first mover space that will allow agencies to try the cloud out without building a cloud support ecosystem and say, is this good for us? Are we going to get good positive outcomes? So we've taken that those initial learnings and then turned them into capabilities of the other agencies can exploit.
That's great stuff. Because I know in the beginnings, when we go back years in cloud, it was like every agency trying to figure out how to do it. Acquisition people weren't sure how to do it. There was concern about security, and now what I've heard three of you already say, you believe security has improved, and I've been arguing cloud is an opportunity because all of a sudden it's going to force you to understand what you have, and you can start over in some ways and get rid of the band-aids we've been doing for security for the last 20 years and really look at how can we really secure that environment. And I think that sort of, it's almost like you can go to GSA and figure out, what has worked in the past, what are other agencies doing, rather than every agency trying to figure out, how do we do this.
That's right.
Michael Hilliard, how about at EPA? What kind of progress is going on with cloud computing at EPA?
So similar to several of my colleagues here, EPA has taken a multi-pronged approach to getting to the cloud, and we see the cloud as not just a specific thing, but kind of a range of things. So we've taken our email and all that back office stuff, software as a service. We've had that out there for several years, had some good lessons learned from that along the way. We're working now on platform as a service type of offerings, so things like the SharePoint and the Salesforce and that type of thing. We see that as a huge market and an expansion there. We're also investing into kind of custom application development hosting. So as David mentioned, cloud.gov, we've been using cloud.gov very successfully. Kudos to you.
Very nice. I love the camaraderie and the collaboration we help bring about.
We've also done somewhere between pilots and production with several of our big program systems, like our Central Data Exchange, with various different cloud vendors, from Azure to Amazon. And so we're kind of now focusing on how do we move our legacy and our up-and-coming applications to a cloud-hosted environment and take the benefits of it along the way.
Right, very cool. So one thing I walk away is there's a lot of progress going on with cloud around government these days. Well said, folks. Let's talk a little bit about a specific program. A lot of times our listeners say, well, people talk about all the progress they're making, but can you cite like a specific example where you really think cloud is making a difference? Let's start with Frontis this time. Frontis Wiggins, if I asked you to point to a program at State Department that you thought cloud computing really is going to make a big difference, what would come to mind?
Well, thank you, Jim. A couple of things spring to mind right off the bat. In addition to, as our colleagues have mentioned, kind of commodity IT and moving some of the back office functions, we've had some specific challenges working in our overseas environment where we're trying to have real-time reporting on world events and at the same time also checking on health and safety for folks. So we use several enclaves of cloud. We've got different flavors, as other folks have mentioned, both an unclassified SBU environment and a classified environment. In our unclassified environment, we use Google. And we've used it recently to do election monitoring in Africa in two places in particular, in Cotonou, Benin, and Abuja in Nigeria, where we actually had the ability of folks to go out and do monitoring at the polling places, reporting real-time voting results into a shared Google Doc that gets updated and monitored both at the embassy but also centrally back here in D.C. And at the same time, we're doing health and welfare checks on the monitors that are going out to the polling places, so our regional security officer in both locations can actually track the monitors who are out there in the field. And literally, some of the polling places are in very difficult places to get to.
I bet that is a challenge.
Exactly. So that's one specific program that we've used cloud for. A second one is in records management. As you know, there's the 2016 requirement from NARA to have all emails captured, and then the 2019 requirement to get all data captured for an agency. We're actually using the cloud for that because we can't build a data center that's going to encapsulate all that amount of traffic. So we're pushing that out to the cloud using Azure and 365 to do that. So we're able to meet both a statutory requirement from NARA, but also at the same time a mission requirement through two different flavors of cloud, one being the SBU side, one the unclassified side.
Yeah, terrific. I mean, sometimes people talk records management, they say, but when you really get into it, records management is a very complex subject to really get done, and especially in the government with the volumes of electronic information that's floating around. Christine Calavosa, what about over at FCC? If I asked you, Christine, what program comes to mind where you think it will make a big difference by going cloud?
So we've actually, like I started earlier, we've actually started with small applications and small programs, but those small programs are very much public-facing applications. So for those that don't know, FCC is very much public-facing. So we have leveraged the cloud for our FCC.gov modernization. So we modernized our internet site, and we readily scale up and scale down as needed based on the feedback that we get from our user base. It's also an avenue by which users have access to our applications, and one of those applications is the Network Outage Reporting System, which is a system that allows the user base to input outages when they happen. So this is the your AT&Ts and your Verizons of the world, right? So what happens is we've actually enhanced this system to actually not just allow manual submissions, but also submissions through the API, right? Because various companies can have various outages at different points in time, and so they've leveraged the API interface to do that, and we scale the API as needed depending on what we have coming in. So I think for us, it's given us an opportunity. This program has given us opportunity to actually operate with less resources and scale up and scale down as needed. And that's across the board for us at the FCC. So, I mean, I just mentioned FCC.gov and NORS, but we have a plethora of different applications, including the Consumer Help Center, which is David has talked about readily as well. Yeah. And we've been it's been really transforming the way we do business with our external customers and our internal customers.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear, especially, I mean, I think we all assume budgets are going to be tight for some time, and so being able to work ways to make progress and get things done quicker and with less resources is clearly, that's one thing. If you don't have much money, it does force you to be creative and innovative.
Correct.
If you want to get things done. but that was good.
David has coined the term the creative problem solvers, so we have a lot of creative problem solvers and change agents here at the agency.
Yeah, David's been on the show. We've met several times. So you guys are doing great things over there. Keep it up. John Edwards, how about CIA? If I point me at a program that you would say, look at this thing, man. This is really making progress and really going to make a difference. What comes to mind?
So I can't talk specific programs, as you can imagine, but I'm talking some global goodness that the cloud is bringing kind of across the board.
Okay.
So first, in several areas. One is cost savings. So again, this cloud was built by CIA with our partner Amazon, but for the community. So it really is a community resource. So looking across missions that have migrated into the cloud, we have cost savings. For example, one particular mission application was spending thousands of dollars a day in our old data center, and now it's hundreds of dollars a day in the new data center, so material savings. Others who are looking at recapping some of their hardware have now gone to the cloud where they don't have to recap any hardware, so there's a cost avoidance there for them. But probably more importantly is the mission impact. We have a number of missions across the board since migrating in that used to take months to do, now it takes minutes, or it took hours to do, and now that takes seconds. So that's having, again, a material impact in how we do business. Probably some of the bigger benefits to those, we now for the first time ever have commercial parity, where before we were always 6 or 7 years behind technology, and now by bringing this cloud in, we now have commercial parity with our partner Amazon. So as they roll out new services, we can roll those new services right onto our cloud. More importantly is the security aspect of it. As I mentioned earlier, we have this battle-tested, hardened cloud on the outside that Amazon manages. We've basically taken that entire region on the inside. So right off the bat, ours is, I say ours is better because we're not connected to the internet.
Right.
So that's a big help for us. But as they do security upgrades and features and patching, which they do daily, we get that same kind of attention to detail as quickly as they do. So again, the commercial parity and the security are phenomenal.
Yeah, the commercial parity is interesting, especially if you can get there now and then maintain it over time. Because there used to be times, well, still are in some agencies, where the government is generations behind, and you go through a certification and accreditation process, and by the time you get that certified and accredited, there's 2 new versions are out there, and things like that was going on. So,
and then lastly on that is it's just the fact that before, when a mission spun up the servers or the hardware they needed, they would have to build it to capacity, what their peak value might be. And then when you do the math, we're probably only using that about 12% of the time.
Right.
And so now it's pay as you go. So you only buy what you need when you need it for as long as you need it, and then it goes away.
Yeah, no, I like it. That whole service model there, that you only pay for what you use, is a big difference for government. I want to hear from our other guest on the same, and look forward to hearing from you, but we first need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Fleisig here with Frontis Wiggins from the Department of State, Christine Colvosa from FCC, John Edwards from CIA, Michael Hilliard from EPA, David Shai from GSA, and Doug Bourgeois from Deloitte Consulting. We're talking about a specific cloud program. We talked about progress, and before we went to break, we heard about some specific areas where cloud's really making a difference. Let's start this time with Michael over at EPA. Michael, if I ask you to point to a program at EPA that you think the movement to cloud is really going to make a difference in how this program can support EPA or in general public, what comes to mind?
Well, if I may, I'd like to talk about two things.
Okay.
One we've already done and one we're actually in the middle of. So the first one is kind of the basic email infrastructure. For years, EPA, as many agencies did, ran our own, and there was a constant battle, as everybody's talked about, capacity, versioning, upgrades, feature sets. When we migrated that, all of that kind of magically disappeared and our users really didn't notice anything, which is exactly kind of what we were hoping for. So that's been a huge success story for us and allowed us, better budgeting, more stable operations, quicker responses on any number of things. The second thing I want to talk about is the move that we're doing with our central data exchange, which is an in-house service that routes a lot of the data that we exchange to and from states and local governments and whatnot. And they were always limited by hardware cycles in terms of any major expansions and having to go through procurements, especially disk space was always the big issue. We're pushing that now through a public-private cloud architecture where we can flexibly move workloads back and forth, take advantage of cheap storage, cheap computing, cheap whatevers as they come along. So that's making a big difference to us and being able to move that stuff to market much faster than we were before.
Yeah, excellent points. And that the idea of email consolidation and all kind of like is a nice setup to move into David Chive, where GSA, I know you probably do stuff in GSA, but I know in cases you have offerings for other agencies too for consolidating of email. But David, if I looked at you and said, as I am right now, and said when cloud computing, point to a program at GSA where you think it really is making a difference in terms of the way processes work and the kinds of benefits you see that will come out in the future.
Right. So, the GSA mission, we serve other agencies, but we act like a typical agency in that we have a portfolio of applications that supports the business of GSA, whether that's public buildings or the acquisition process or transforming technology. And I'll pick on a couple of those internal applications because they tell a good story. We built something called the Acquisition Gateway. It's kind of a central clearinghouse for agencies to come in and look at the acquisition life cycle and find places to get great acquisitions in government. And so that's kind of what the application does. But what's really important is how we built it. We had DevSecOps teams that were made up of our business customers, our developers, our security people, and our contract support that were helping us write code and do stuff. Come in and build this thing with repeatable tools, repeatable process, out to cloud. All the environments they were developing in were in the cloud. And when this thing was done, it was built, very cheaply, iteratively. We were able to make incremental investments and validate, are we getting good results in the application, and then double down in the places where we saw good results in the application and stop investments in places where we didn't see good investments. So that's a good story in and of itself. The real value was when we started building the next thing, in this case, the TDR tool, Transaction Data Reporting Tool. We were able to take the components from that first application, rather than writing brand new code, build stuff from those reusable components at almost no cost to tax-paying governments. And as that capability was standing up, as the rules were being written about this thing, we were building stuff, deconstructing, rebuilding as the rules were being built. 2 days after the rule was built, we had an application stood up and ready to go. Wow. So really good stuff. And all of that was enabled.
To me, like from all the panelists, it sounds like once you got that first one done, it just creates the momentum to next one, and people start getting, like we said, creative and innovative and come up with new ideas to do new things.
That's right.
Doug Bourgeois, tell us a little bit about programs you see across your customer base that you think are really programs that are going to make a big difference.
I got two examples for you here, Jim. I started with DoD before, and now I'll come to healthcare with Food and Drug Administration for The program's the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, which redesigned and deployed their enterprise data management portal as their first application that they pushed out to the cloud, which on the one hand kind of set the path from a security standpoint, kind of paving the way for other programs, so the Pathfinder that way. But more importantly, they transformed the model for application design, implementation, and support, enabling that program to be much more responsive and agile to mission needs. So basically enabling the program and IT support for that program to move at the speed of the mission, which is a theme that I think we've heard here answering this question.
Right now, in terms of what's going on, I mean, there's a big effort to try to speed up the processes with getting things to market.
Exactly. So it's an example where the cloud is enabling IT to provide real mission impact on the metrics that really matter for the mission and the key stakeholders, obviously, that use that mission. The second example is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and this is the next wave of the back office trend that I think is moving to the cloud, and this is their ERP application. So they, as part of their broad approach to data center transformation, decided to move their ERP suite and the middleware associated with that over to the cloud, and so they were able to integrate multiple disparate enterprise IT systems and apps and retire 23 applications as part of their migration process. So again, I think we heard previously, looking more from a portfolio standpoint and consolidating as they go, not just the infrastructure perspective, but consolidating the applications as part of the migration process. And now those business applications are more secure and more scalable as a result. So again, being able to provide better support and better services to the users of those applications.
Excellent. I know a little bit about that. Bureau, when they were in Treasury, and I remember those 23, you probably eliminated. So very interesting. Good job. Great stories there. Let's talk a little bit now about some of the challenges you face when you move to the cloud. Let's start with Christine this time. Christine, what are some of the challenges you face, some of the things you still need to overcome, say, to get to where you want to be with this program?
Right, so if I can start, I mean, moving to the cloud is what I call definitely a paradigm shift. So we are changing the way we do IT development, solutioning, and implementation. So the first challenge, or quote-unquote opportunity, is it's a culture shift. It's a culture change, both from the IT staff and from the business staff, right? So the business is used to just giving you requirements, going away, and then coming back 9 months, 12 months, a year and a half later and saying, here's your product. But since then, requirements have changed. So we have, with the move to the cloud, have moved more to an agile framework, an agile way of working, and it's a day-to-day work with the business instead of developing something and then testing it, right? So that's definitely one of the challenges. It's definitely a culture shift. Some of the business users have definitely liked it and liked working one-on-one. Some of them have found it very hard, and so that's one of the challenges we face. One of the second challenges we face is obviously legacy applications and interfaces. So while we decide to move applications to the cloud, there's still a lot of interfacing and dependency with legacy applications, and so how do we methodically, strategically take an approach to either move the back-end piece first and or move the application and or how do we make those connections? Right. Third piece is, skill set and expertise, right? So we've got a list of a ton of IT folks who are used to doing code development and doing it one specific way. So as we move to the cloud, we're getting more agile. We need people to be more agile and work more in the customization of a platform or a service instead of actually custom coding things. And so that's a challenge for us. And then last but not least, I think it's about porting the applications or moving them, right? And so what does that mean? How do we interpret that? How do we define that for us, right, and then actually taking action?
Excellent. And 152 shows, 152 times the word culture has come up under challenge. It's just the way it is, and we should have a prize for that. The first person that brings up culture. Now we got to think it's got to be under $20 because you're government folks. To the under $20 prize for the first one who mentions culture on the radio show. David, what are some of the challenges that you hit day to day that you still need to overcome to really get to be where you want to be?
Right. So Christine hit the nail on the head. You know, it's culture and people, and so I'll talk a little bit about some of the things we did to try to circumvent some of those challenges. So on the culture side, we did the win small, win early process, gain the trust of your customers, and then expand from there and double down on those winnings. You know, the way you circumvent culture is you win them over. You do a good job. You don't fail.
Yeah, I think we just see that right across the board in IT, the Big Bang Theory. We're going to do the multi-billion-dollar program and roll it out. Just isn't happening anymore.
Right. There's a reason why big systems fail as much as they do, and avoid that if you can. You know, do small investments, small wins, turn that into medium investments, medium wins, and then go from there. On the talent side, so we do a lot to curate the pipeline of talent coming into the organization. First, we train our personnel. They're going through a quantum shift in how they deliver, deploy, manage, and maintain infrastructure. And we owe it to the hardworking federal government employees that work for us to make sure they have the skills necessary to stay current and be modern in how they do stuff, so we train them like crazy. But we also are very cautious and intentional about making sure the pipeline of talent coming into the organization is filled with the type of people that we need. So, you know, I can't pay what my dear friend Doug pays out in the private sector in the public space, but what I can do is appeal to public service. I can say the mission here.
Very noble about doing public service.
Absolutely, yes. The mission of GSA is important. The mission of the federal government is important. You know, we're not curing cancer, but we're helping the people curing cancer focus on that rather than run public buildings or doing acquisitions. And that's appealing to people. And what we're finding is that the right people, the type of people that we want to come and transform government through the use of technology, that's a message that resonates with them. So we spend a lot of time going to where they are, going to meetups, going to Silicon Valley, going to Brooklyn, going to Austin, hotbeds of technology development, and drawing those people into government service.
It's really true. The government's a big ecosystem, and agencies rely on others. We once did a thing at Treasury looking at our supply chain, you could call it, but all the other interdependencies we had. And there were literally hundreds and hundreds of interdependencies you had in order for Treasury to do what Treasury had to do. And so GSA, I'm sure, is supporting hundreds and hundreds of other agencies in different ways that are not even readily apparent to the individuals. Michael Hilliard, challenges you're facing day to day.
So, first one is on the technical side. I mean, bandwidth has always been our most prized possession at EPA, and putting things out in the cloud has put more pressure on that. And you layer on top of that the requirements for the trusted internet connections, and that's just created a whole new series of swirl as we try and move things out. Contracts, we're a little bit. I don't know, don't want to say the word behind, but we're catching up, and what we're trying to do is avoid the proliferation of cloud contracts with our program offices directly. So trying to keep people back into the fold so EPA has just a central set. Culture is a very interesting one, and I'll echo everything, and I'm sure we're all going to say culture. The story that I always like to tell is every time I talk about cloud with the customer, the first thing they say is, when can I spin up my VMs? I mean, they have a very on-prem data center mindset to the cloud. And so one of our challenges is really trying to re-educate our internal, developers and, middle management staff into, cloud is not just, it can be an extension of your on-prem, but there's a whole plethora of other things that you can take advantage of and to get that mindset going.
Excellent points there. John Edwards, what are some of the challenges at CIA, things that you feel like things you need to get, sort of like the constraints you got to get by to get where you want to be?
Right, so I echo, again, my panel colleagues from a culture standpoint and just a fear of something new. I always said that we did not invent the four-corner stall, but we perfected it in a lot of areas. And so when we first brought this thing on, it really comes down to, as David said, reskilling the workforce, both staff and contractor. How do you deal with this new thing, and how do you migrate applications to that? But more importantly, the interesting thing for us is just in education. Even though we call ours a commercial cloud services because we want to reflect commercial practices and be more like commercial, an education issue because people thought that we were putting all of our data, our classified data out into a commercial cloud,
Right.
where everybody else says, no, we have that cloud inside. So it's an education process because ultimately what we want to do is we want to be more like commercial. So one of the things for us is we've got a challenge for our folks and our mission partners is not to try to make our Amazon partner act like government, but make ourselves act more like Amazon. And so we always have to do that because we want to operate, again, at the speed of mission, not the speed of government. So for us, it's been education, it's been reskilling, retraining workforce. But as my colleagues mentioned, we didn't use the stick, we used the carrot. We migrated some early quick win apps in and got some momentum and some velocity, and then people just started talking. And now we're finding is nobody wants to be last.
Yeah. Interesting, interesting. Francis Wiggins at the State Department, I'm sure you would say ditto to a lot of things you've already heard, but is there some other things that come to mind to you that are challenges that we could put on the list here when trying to get where you want to get with cloud?
Absolutely, Jim. So I'll take a philosophical approach here. There's a favorite expression of mine, it's nonna nova sub solo, which is Latin for there's nothing new under the sun. And, you know, when you look at IT systems where you're going from a LAN system to a distributed network to distributed systems, cloud is sort of the next iteration of that. It's a maturation in the process. But one of the challenges is that we still have legacy processes behind a lot of this, and this goes back to the point of culture. I remember when we did the first intranet back in 1994, we went and installed Windows NT and IIS, and we installed 15,000 feet of UTP, did all these systems to bring all our China posts into a single system. And after the briefing that we gave to the ambassador, he walked up to me and said, I feel like he just drove up a fleet of Ferraris, hand me the keys, I don't know how to drive. Okay. And it's the same challenge we have with cloud. Now, granted, you're moving at a faster pace, there's this agile approach to it, but a lot of our customers don't understand that in order to take full advantage of the cloud, they have to modernize the processes and the work performance they do behind there. And a lot of those legacy processes have not been modernized. That's one challenge I see. Also, to echo some of the comments by some of my panel members, the other challenge I see is capitalization of the infrastructure. So a lot of people want to go out to the cloud, but in order to do that, you have to improve the on-ramp to get there, the bandwidth issues, and talking about the TIC. Subject near and dear to my heart is the fact that I've got about 60 to 70% of my customers are in an overseas environment. Yeah. And so trying to get them regular, consistent access to the internet through a TIC that's backhauling everything through the States is hugely problematic. And if we want to break out into the internet fabric overseas, that takes a whole other set of constraints that we have to deal with. And so we're coming up with this hybrid model where we envision that we're going to have to maintain some on-prem infrastructure in embassies overseas and then have some infrastructure back in the States. And the other thing I would say to cloud vendors out there is you're looking at the enterprise and how you're architecting this stuff. You have to consider folks like the Department of State where you have this huge overseas presence and having everything hosted back in the States is a problem as far as performance goes. And then last but not least, I said the other challenge I have with cloud is a lot of people believe innovation is clicking the buy button. Right. So I've got folks out there who are innovating by purchasing cloud services, not always through the CIO's office. So it sets up a whole other on-ramp for shadow IT, which is a whole separate discussion. So trying to get our hands around the governance of that, trying to have the infrastructure support it, and also be able to have the performance on the cloud for a widely distributed series of customers is a huge challenge.
Yeah, excellent point. And that overseas challenge, when it does bring in all kinds of new considerations, and having been CIO Treasury for 7 years with all the bureaus, I understand that shadow computing too, and people doing things that.
So is Mr. Hurd on the Hill.
Yeah, I want to hear from Doug on the same subject, but we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Fleisig here with Francis Wiggins from State Department, Christine Calvosa from FCC, John Edwards from CIA, Michael Hilliard from EPA, David Shai from GSA, and Doug Bourgeois from Deloitte Consulting. We've been talking about progress. We've been talking about programs. Now we're talking a little bit about some of the challenges. And when we went to break, we had not heard yet from Doug. Doug, tell us about some of the challenges you see that need to be overcome to really get to where you want to help your customers be.
Well, Jim, much like the rest of my colleagues here on the panel, I would be remiss if I did not say something about culture and organization. But let me try and expand on what's already been said,
By
right?
the way, I think it was Bobby Kennedy said 1/3 of everybody's against everything all the time, no matter what it is. So, I mean, you know.
My experience with transformation is that sounds about right. On the topic of culture, what I've seen pretty consistently across government is that we talk a lot about air cover or support at the top in order to overcome cultural challenges, and I think that's an absolute necessity. But I think with the degree of change that's required now, it requires more than just air cover. It requires leadership engagement throughout the cultural change process in order for that to take. Because change, and particularly from a culture standpoint, tends to have a rubber band effect.
Sure.
You turn around and it snaps back to its original form while you're not looking. So you have to kind of continuously come back to it, and you have to lead from an engagement standpoint. On the topic of organizational change and the talent and the skill sets and all that, everybody covered it very, very well. One thing that we found that works really, really well with our clients is to establish a small center of excellence concept to infuse the technical expertise necessary to help guide the staff through the evolution of skill sets with experts who have really been there, done that, 10 times, 20 times, 30 times.
Talk about GSA.
And then use that to help change the way, not just the skill sets and the technologies and the way that they use them, but the processes that they use to deliver those. And then finally, I would say, up from a planning standpoint, I think Christine talked about early on about at the FCC and their approach to the applications. Cloud is not as much a destination as it is a journey. And so each application has its own characteristics, and each one has a different affinity, if you will, or readiness for the cloud. And I think where we see very, very high success rates of very large application portfolios in terms of number of applications moving to the cloud, they're doing detailed engineering assessments of every application to understand exactly what needs to change for this thing to work very, very well in the cloud.
Right.
I think
Very
that's
interesting. Very good points. Now, we've kind of been talking about some lessons learned as we've been talking about challenges, but are there some other lessons learned you'd put out there on the table? David, is there another lesson learned you'd like to mention here that others working on these kinds of programs might want to hear about?
Sure. So cloud is not nirvana, and it is not the destination. It's just a step along the way. You can mature your adoption and use of cloud just like you can mature any infrastructure that you use. So what we've found is if we build our applications right, we build our infrastructure right, and we port it out to the cloud, that it takes constant analysis and reanalysis to make sure that it's running efficiently and that it's the best use of that cloud. Perfect examples are analytics ecosystem. We just moved the workloads from that ecosystem from one cloud to the other, and so our prices dropped by 60%. We saw usability of the application jump by moving to another cloud. Be agnostic about the cloud and search out for the best stuff because it's out there.
Very good. Frontis Wiggins, in addition to those challenges we talked about, is there a lesson learned that comes to mind that you'd pass on to someone?
Absolutely. And to echo some of what David said, usually when you have a management challenge, IT is seen as a panacea that cures a lot of ills, and cloud is another example of a miracle cure for a lot of issues. One of the things that we've found is that cloud is forcing us to, or giving us an opportunity, I guess is the best way to put it, to go out and look at commonalities of business practices across the entire corporate environment and able to stitch together different things that before might have been in silos. It gives us a chance to have the dialogue and actually look at requirements as opposed to solutions, which I mentioned earlier. And last but not least is the idea that you can go to a customer-centric approach to doing things and leverage FITARA as part of that carrot approach to the governance process, because people know about the cloud, they want to go to the cloud, and you can use FITARA as a way, as an on-ramp to get there to have that discussion with them.
Excellent points. Excellent point. Christine, any lesson learned that you'd like to pass along?
So for us, it's really simple, and I think both David and Frontis said something already, but for us, it's really start small and be successful at starting small. So one thing that works at the FCC is that success breeds success. So we started with a few small applications, and then the bureaus and offices themselves are talking to each other, and that's breeding its own success. So start small and be successful what you start. And then the second item is, there's a lot of cloud services out there, and as each agency brings them in, you're now acquiring a portfolio of cloud services, right? And so one thing that we've learned fast is that there's a lot of requirements, and they could be all the way from the chairman down. And we are able to now select cloud service solutions from the portfolio that we have. And so we're able to be more agile and be able to implement faster. So as you build that portfolio of the cloud portfolio, leverage it and use it for the requirements that are coming in.
Excellent. John, you have any lesson learned you can add to that?
Yeah, quickly, it's communicate, because at the end of the day, it's an education process, and so we set up a cloud implementation team, outreach team, if you will, that goes across the community, both internal to the agency and again across the community, help people understand what it is, what it's not, how you use it, whether or not you rehost, refactor, or do nothing, how you create your accounts, basically all that blocking and tackling stuff that they've got to get right for it to be worthwhile to move.
Excellent, excellent point. All great stuff. Michael Hilliard, I want to come to you, but I want to change the question.
Oh, okay.
We need to talk about the future. We do. We end all of our shows talking about, what does this all mean? We're doing it for a reason. We're saving money and all that, but we hope that there's going to be some, a vision down the road that of dramatic improvements or better services or services to the citizen. So, Michael, looking to the future, we got about 12 minutes here, so it's about a minute and a half from each of our panelists. If you look to the future, what do you see in terms of the benefits that are going to come out of this down the road?
So the benefits I see coming out of down the road here is that the on-premise computing will slowly vanish as infrastructure is retired. We will eventually see everything out in the cloud. The idea of custom coding will also, over the years, that will vanish too. We will be in a kind of a very service or software as a service oriented. And the end game of all of this is just the immediacy, right? We will be able to move at the same speed as our commercial partners and what our users expect. Everybody has their phone and they expect to find an app for everything.
Right.
And they expect those apps to be up to date, current, patched, et cetera, and that's the end game, and that's where we'll be.
And wait till the kids get into the workforce. David, what's the crystal ball look like to you when you look down the road and try to envision this down in the future?
Great. For government, I think it's going to look a little like the commercial space where they're having some success right now with containerization of their platforms.
Yeah, we cover that in our DevOps program.
Yeah. So if your DevSecOps teams can build entire packages, including the infrastructure layer, the security layers, the networking layers, the application layers, and the user presentation layers into a single container, that makes their deployment very, very easy. It helps them to build things rapidly and reuse things readily. The security implications are profound. If you can stand up a workload for a second or 10 seconds or 10 minutes while that workload needs to be acted against and then turn it down, the security implications are huge.
Sure.
The bad actors can't hack stuff that's just not there. That's just
it's
not
like a
on.
one-time password that changes with every time you do a
That's
transaction.
exactly right. So that's where we're
Excellent.
putting a lot of our kind of mental capital into, going into that ecosystem.
Great stuff. Look forward to it. Christine Colvosa at FCC. Where's this all going, Christine? What's it look like to you down the road?
So for at the FCC, we're just all in for cloud. So we're moving basically our entire enterprise into the cloud as best possible. One thing that we want to do and leverage is we continue to see is more agility, more scalability, and better ability to deliver solutions to our customer base, both internal and external. One thing like David and Michael have mentioned was security and the ability to customize instead of actually custom code is going to be much more needed. And one thing I wrote down lastly was something that I think is on everybody's wish list is no outdated old legacy systems that need to be patched. So hopefully moving to the cloud means that we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Right.
So that's where we stand.
Right. Yeah, we had that discussion too multiple times. Is we don't want to move old stuff to the cloud. We want to get new stuff in the cloud. Doug Bourgeois, what's it look like down the road to you, Doug? Where's this all going?
A couple of quick things and then an example.
Okay.
regardless of whether I think in agencies like FCC and moving everything to the cloud, or like maybe some of the others on the panel here, where many things will move to the cloud and many will stay within their own data center, whatever you call that, a multi-cloud model or a hybrid cloud type situation
Right.
is here to stay. And I think what that means right now is we're reaching an inflection point where folks are finally beginning to understand what that means and the implications of it, and they're beginning, industry and the technology providers as well as government are going to begin to rapidly adopt and mature their approach to managing that hybrid cloud approach from a security standpoint, fully leveraging automation across that multi-cloud environment and figuring out how to manage it more effectively and more efficiently to support the mission. And then the second is, and I think this is kind of a bigger picture trend, cloud, it's really not about the cloud at all. Cloud becomes an enabler for the government to rapidly transition to more digital type of organizations. So cloud ushers in the era of digital transformation. And I think that we've got some great examples in the private sector of Netflix, Facebook, Twitter, and those other organizations that can conceive, can build and deploy new business capability very, very rapidly and transform the way they operate fundamentally. And I think the government is going to take advantage and ride the wave of cloud into that digital era. And as an example, me and my team fairly recently got together with the good folks over at EPA, and we wrote a white paper about that data exchange environment and their approach to digital transformation, where they actually use all these types of great best practices that are in place at the private sector. And it's called Digital Transformation at EPA. Google it. It's actually a pretty good read.
Yeah, very good. Thanks. And in a way, that's nice. Everyone's talking about digital services and digital government agencies and things like that. And what you just described is how cloud is a stepping stone in that direction. Frontis Wiggins, what's this look like to you down the road? Where's this all going?
To continue the theme, I foresee the digital diplomat. The environment will look a little different for some of my colleagues, as was alluded to earlier. The fact that we're going to have a hybrid environment we're going to have to exist in for a while to come. But I foresee in the future that we're going to have relaxation or changing of the tick model to allow for penetration of the internet fabric overseas, and I'll give our diplomats the opportunity to be more mobile and more digital. Relate to that some of the things that Christine said about having a portfolio of services that you can choose from, but at the same time come up with disposable apps, if you will, something that can be built quickly, used, and then disposed of to meet real-time needs for getting to mission essentials, as John alluded to. I think those are all going to be part of the future for the department. It sounds a little parochial, so I'm speaking just for the department, but our environment is a little bit different because we are 70% overseas.
Yeah, excellent points. John Edwards, where's this going for you? What's it look like down the road?
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, it is fundamentally changing the way IT works and how we do IT across the board. I think, as Doug mentioned, this it's a relentless pace of innovation happening out there, and these cloud technologies allow us actually to take advantage of that at that pace never before like we could. David mentioned containerization, and that inside the cloud is letting us do things, again, we've never been able to do, and we're just scratching the surface. So never before have we been able to get analysts, targeters, developers, and data scientists together in a collaborative environment where they can all look at the same data, they can write executables live while looking at the data, where before we had co-located data, now we can actually have integrated data. And so again, it's fundamentally changing. And last, I had to say that we brought Marketplace in to the cloud, and so now that's letting us bring new applications in, where before it would take us 9 months to bring one in. And now we've got 100 and something apps in. Amazon, I think, has 3,500, so we're a little bit behind. But what it's letting our folks do is that group I just mentioned, those four entities, can now download an app within seconds, try their data against it, and say, does this solve my problem? If it does, they can basically rent it for as long as they want. If not, they blow up that instance and download another app. And so again, it's changing the way that our folks do business.
Excellent points, folks. This was some great content here. Let me do my best to try to summarize some of the things that we talked about, some of the highlights that I heard. When we talked about progress, what resonated with me is cloud is here to stay. I mean, there was a time where people were saying a new buzzword, a new something, but it's not. It is clearly where we're going in the future. It is bringing about fundamental change. We're getting better security. Speed is a big deal. Governance processes are important to make sure that you can do things and there's a lot of centers of excellence popping up around, and folks that are building centers of excellence around some of these success stories. Programs, we heard about the overseas polling process in monitoring, which I thought was fascinating in terms of a cloud application. We heard about records management and the fact that there are very large volumes of records need to be managed, and cloud makes the offer. The FCC.gov modernization was a program that sounds exciting to me. Outage reporting at FCC, a lot of cost savings programs that we heard about. And commercial parity, which came up a number of times on the various topics we talked about here, is the government now catching up and having commercial parity with market forces and getting in front of that curve, as opposed to always trying to catch up to that curve. When we talk challenges, we immediately jumped into culture change, which I think everyone appreciates that when you do something different, you can change somebody's job title overnight, but changing their behavior or how they do their job is a whole different set of issues. I know when one time we changed the commo guys became, the telecommunications specialists or something, and because their jobs were changing, but in their mind they were always the commo guys. It's just the way it works. We talked about on challenges legacy applications. There's a lot of that out there, and you need to hopefully modernize before moving to cloud. The difficulty getting good skill sets and having a bench. You need a bench with skilled people. Win early, win small came across a couple times in our discussions. Let's create an environment where we have continuous process modernization and we have continuous improvement and win one, and it leads to others. We heard about bandwidth being a challenge. That as we move to cloud, we can't lose the latency and speed and things that we need. We heard about re-education of processes being a challenge. People need to be re-educated to do things a little differently. And we heard about the capitalization of the infrastructure as also an issue. The infrastructure needs to keep up with the things that are going on with the application side. Lessons, I heard two things that over and over again. Start small, same thing we heard. I heard about success breeds success. And I heard about communicate. You got to keep those lines of communications out there. For the future, we talked about on-premise programs slowly leaving. We talk about software as a service becoming a model that clearly is picking up. We talked about speed and agility significantly improvement, security significantly improving. We heard about the concept of digital organizations and digital services that we'll see in the future as agencies doing things in a much more digital fashion. We heard about marketplace applications and the fact that we're now have marketplace caught up to the marketplace. Now we need the marketplace applications to also be part of the day-to-day program. And I heard quite a bit about focus on mission. Focus on the mission itself is something that needs to be done. With that, I want to shift over and begin to say thank you first to our panelists from taking time from your busy schedules to share this great content with us and our listening audience. I want to thank our sponsor, without which we don't have a program, so thank you kindly for doing this. Thank the good people here at Federal News Radio and my good friend at Trezza Media, Tom Trezza, who always makes things go so smoothly for all of us. And of course, most importantly, thanks to the listening audience out there who is tuning in to listen to our show each month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.